the voice that made millions dance, the face that broke millions of hearts, and the secret that he carried for years, hiding in plain sight. George Michael wasn't just a pop star. He was a once-in-a-generation talent who transformed from teen heartthrob to serious artist, from closeted icon to proud activist, from global superstar to reclusive legend. Behind the perfect hair and the infectious smile was a man struggling with fame, sexuality, grief, and the impossible pressure of being everything to everyone while never being allowed to be himself. If you want the real stories behind music's most fascinating transformations, subscribe to Version Vault and hit that notification bell. We're about to explore 8 versions of George Michael, from Wham sensation to eternal legend. Version 1, the teen heartthrob. In 1982, 2 working-class kids from North London formed a duo that would define early 80s pop, Wham. And George Michael, born Georgios Kyriakos Panayiotou, was the undeniable star. Wham Rap introduced them, but Young Guns, Go For It, made them famous. Then came the explosion, Wake Me Up Before You Go Go. Impossibly catchy, aggressively optimistic, with a video featuring George and Andrew Ridgeley in Choose Life t-shirts and Dayglow shorts. This version of George was all sunshine and energy. Big hair, bright smiles, choreographed moves. He was the pretty one, the talented one, the one teenage girls plastered on their bedroom walls. Club Tropicana sold a fantasy of eternal summer. Freedom, the original, was pure pop perfection. Wham! Became massive in the UK, then Europe, then globally. But even then, there were hints of something deeper. George wrote all the songs. His voice had a richness that went beyond bubblegum pop. And behind the carefree image, he was already feeling trapped. The teen heartthrob was a construction, a marketable, non-threatening, heterosexual fantasy. Girls could dream about him. Boys wanted to be him. Parents approved. George was playing a role, and he was exhausted before he even turned 21. What nobody knew was that George Michael was gay. In the early 80s, in mainstream pop music, that was unthinkable. So he smiled, he performed, and he buried the truth deeper with every magazine cover. The foundation was already cracking, because you can't build a career on a lie forever. Version 2, the reluctant sex symbol. At just 17 years old, George Michael wrote a song that would define romantic heartbreak for generations. Careless Whisper, that opening saxophone riff, the aching vulnerability in his voice, the lyrics about guilt and lost love. It was sophisticated beyond his years, and it became one of the best-selling singles of all time. Released as a George Michael solo single in 1984, Careless Whisper showed that he was more than just a teen pop star. He was a serious artist with serious talent. Then came Last Christmas in December 1984, a song that would become arguably the most enduring Christmas pop song ever written. Wham! Was now untouchable. But this version of George was deeply uncomfortable. He was being sold as a sex symbol. The stubble, the sultry looks, the videos with beautiful women draped over him. Every interview asked about his girlfriends. Every magazine article speculated about his love life. George played along because he had no choice. The 80s music industry had no space for openly gay pop stars. Boy George could be flamboyant because he was other. George Michael had to be attainable, desirable, heterosexual. The pressure was crushing. Millions of women desired him. He couldn't desire them back. Not in the way they wanted. Not in the way his career demanded. By 1986, George had had enough. Wham! Performed their farewell concert at Wembley Stadium to 72,000 fans. The duo was over. Andrew Ridgeley was happy to step back. George Michael was ready to become a solo artist on his own terms. But first, he had to navigate the minefield of reinvention while still hiding his truth. The reluctant sex symbol knew that to be taken seriously, he needed to transform completely. Version 3, the serious artist. In 1987, George Michael released Faith and became a global phenomenon on his own terms. The album was a masterclass in reinvention. Gone was the clean-cut teen idol. In his place, leather jacket, tight jeans, designer stubble, aviator sunglasses. The look said, bad boy. The music said, serious artist. I Want Your Sex courted controversy deliberately. Faith itself was a rockabilly-infused declaration of confidence. Father Figure showcased his vocal maturity and emotional depth. One More Try was a soul ballad that rivaled anything from the Motown legends. The album sold 25 million copies worldwide. It won the Grammy for Album of the Year. George Michael had proven he wasn't just a pretty face or a teen idol. He was one of the greatest artists of his generation. But the success came with a cost. The world tour was exhausting. The promotional machine never stopped. And still, he was hiding. Every interview about love songs, every question about relationships, every assumption of heterosexuality. He played along, gave vague answers, dated women publicly, though they were often friends or beards. This version of George was critically respected and commercially dominant. He'd achieved everything a pop star could dream of, but he was living a double life, and the strain was showing. He began to resent the fame, the constant scrutiny, the invasion of privacy, the fact that his art was overshadowed by discussions of his personal life, even when the personal life was a carefully constructed fiction. The serious artist had conquered the music world, but he was about to wage war against the industry itself. Version 4, the label Rebel. In 1990, George Michael did something almost unheard of. He sued his own record label. Sony Music wanted him to be a product, to tour constantly, to release albums on their schedule. To be the profitable pop star they'd invested in, George wanted artistic freedom, control over his image, the right to release music when he wanted, how he wanted. The legal battle lasted years and cost millions. George called the contract professional slavery. Sony called him ungrateful. The music industry watched with fascination and horror. While the lawsuit dragged on, George released Listen Without Prejudice Vol. 1 in 1990. The album was deliberately less commercial, more introspective, and it contained one of his most iconic songs, Freedom 90. The video for Freedom 90 was revolutionary. George didn't appear in it at all. Instead, supermodels, Linda Evangelista, Christy Turlington, Naomi Campbell, Cindy Crawford, Tatjana Patitz, lip-synced his lyrics while his old Wham memorabilia burned on screen. The message was clear. He was destroying the old image. No more relying on his looks. No more playing the game. The music had to stand on its own. He lost the lawsuit in 1994, but won the respect of every artist who'd ever felt exploited by the industry. He couldn't release new music with Sony, so he collaborated with other artists. Duets, guest appearances, charity singles. The label Rebel was broke by industry standards, but rich in credibility. He'd stood up to the machine and survived. He'd become a martyr for artists' rights. But the battle took years from his career. And while he was fighting Sony, his personal life was falling apart in ways the public couldn't see. His partner, Anselmo Falepa, whom he'd met in 1991, died from AIDS-related causes in 1993. George was devastated, but couldn't publicly mourn, because the world didn't know he was gay. The secrets were becoming unbearable, and soon, very soon, they would explode into public view. Version 5, The Outed Icon. April 7th, 1998. Will Rogers Memorial Park in Beverly Hills. A public restroom. George Michael was arrested for engaging in a lewd act with an undercover police officer. The tabloids went insane. The jokes were endless. The humiliation was global. For most celebrities, this would have been career suicide. For George Michael, it became liberation. Within days, he did something remarkable. He owned it completely. He came out publicly, not with shame, but with defiance. He gave interviews where he was honest for the first time in his career. He talked about the pressure of hiding. He talked about the police entrapment. He turned victimhood into activism. Then came his response. The single, Outside. The song was cheeky, funky, and unapologetic. The video featured policemen in disco bathrooms, turning the sight of his arrest into a celebration. He transformed public humiliation into pride. It was brilliant. The gay community embraced him immediately. Here was a global superstar saying, "Yes, I'm gay, and I'm not ashamed." In 1998, that still mattered enormously. Straight fans mostly stayed loyal because George handled it with such humor and honesty. The narrative shifted from scandal to good for him. This version of George was finally, authentically himself. He started a long-term relationship with Kenny Goss. He became an activist for LGBTQ+ rights. He spoke openly about the damage that closeting had done to his mental health. The outed icon was free. For the first time since he was a teenager, George Michael could be George Michael. But freedom came with grief. He'd lost Anselmo. He'd lost years to hiding. and he'd never fully processed the trauma of fame, secrecy, and loss. The cracks were still there, and they were about to widen. Version 6. The Activist and Philanthropist. What the public saw. George Michael the pop star, occasionally in the headlines, releasing music sporadically. What they didn't see. George Michael the secret philanthropist, donating millions anonymously to hospitals, AIDS research, children's charities, homeless shelters. After his death, stories emerged of extraordinary generosity. He'd paid for a stranger's IVF treatment after seeing her interviewed on TV. He'd volunteered at homeless shelters. He'd funded nurses' education. He'd donated royalties from Last Christmas to charity every single year. This version of George used his wealth to genuinely help people. Not for publicity, but because he believed in giving back. He was also politically active. He released Shoot the Dog in 2002, a satirical song and video criticizing Tony Blair and George W. Bush's alliance during the Iraq War. The backlash was intense, but George didn't care. He said what he believed. He performed at Live 8 in 2005. He participated in Pride events. He used his platform for causes he believed in. But beneath the activism and generosity, George was struggling. His mother Leslie had died in 1997, just before his arrest. He'd never properly grieved her, then Anselmo's death. The pressure of decades of fame, the isolation that comes with being ultra-famous. He started using drugs, marijuana heavily, but also harder substances occasionally. It was recreational at first, then became a coping mechanism. Arrests started. 2006 for possession of drugs, 2007 for driving under the influence. The incidents piled up. Each one brought more tabloid scrutiny, more jokes, more judgment. The activist and philanthropist was doing good in the world, but crumbling personally. Success and stability on the outside, chaos and addiction on the inside. The balance couldn't hold forever. Version 7. The Troubled Recluse. By 2008, George Michael's drug use was no longer a private matter. It was tabloid fodder, driving under the influence, crashes into shopfronts, public intoxication, possession charges. In 2010, he was sentenced to 8 weeks in prison, served 4, after pleading guilty to driving under the influence of drugs. The man who'd been one of the biggest stars in the world was now primarily known for his scandals. The jokes were cruel. The tabloids were merciless. Concert tours were announced and canceled. When he did perform, reviews were mixed. Some nights brilliant, others worrying. Fans didn't know which George would show up. His relationship with Kenny Goss ended in 2009 after 13 years together. George was increasingly isolated, holed up in his North London home. Then, in November 2011, George fell seriously ill while on tour in Vienna. Pneumonia. He was hospitalized for weeks, placed in an induced coma, and nearly died. When he recovered, he gave emotional interviews about staring death in the face. He seemed grateful to be alive, determined to change. But addiction doesn't release its grip easily. This version of George was a ghost of his former self. The voice was still there when he could access it. The talent remained. But the joy was gone. The light had dimmed. The troubled recluse was a man haunted by grief he'd never processed. His mother. His first love, Anselmo. The loss of his youth to fame. The years wasted hiding. The isolation of superstardom. He tried to come back. He released Symphonica in 2014. A live album of orchestral versions of his hits. It was beautiful, but felt like a goodbye, because in many ways, it was. Version 8, The Eternal Legend, December 25th, 2016, Christmas Day. George Michael's partner, Fadi Fawaz, found him dead in his Oxfordshire home, heart disease exacerbated by fatty liver. He was 53 years old. The irony was devastating. The man who'd written Last Christmas, one of the most beloved holiday songs ever, died on Christmas morning. The world mourned. Tributes poured in from legends across music. Elton John, Madonna, Adele, everyone spoke about George's genius, his kindness, his generosity. But here's what's remarkable. George Michael's reputation has only grown since his death. The younger generation discovered him through TikTok and streaming. Careless Whisper became a meme, then a genuine appreciation. Gen Z found the music their parents loved and realized this guy was incredible. Last Christmas finally hit #1 in the UK in 2021, 36 years after its release. George got his first Christmas #1 posthumously. Documentaries explored his life more honestly. George Michael Freedom, which he was working on before his death, and 2017's Freedom, George Michael showed the man behind the icon. Critics reassessed his catalogue. The sophistication of Faith, the bravery of Freedom, 90. The consistent quality across 3 decades. George Michael wasn't just a pop star, he was one of the great artists of his generation, period. His activism is now celebrated. His generosity is finally public knowledge. His struggle with sexuality in an unaccepting era is understood with empathy. The eternal legend is George Michael freed from the burden of George Michael. The music lives without the complications of the man. The voice remains perfect in recordings, never aging, never faltering. Artists cite him as an influence constantly. Sam Smith, Troye Sivan, Ollie Alexander. Openly gay male pop stars who owe their ability to exist to pioneers like George. His estate continues his charitable work. Every Christmas, Last Christmas, generates new royalties that fund new causes. His music streams in billions. George Michael in death has become what he could never fully be in life. Celebrated completely, understood fully, loved unconditionally. 8 versions of George Michael. 8 chapters in a story of extraordinary talent, impossible pressure, and ultimate liberation. George's story isn't just about pop music. It's about the cost of fame in an era before acceptance. About a man who gave the world joy while carrying private pain. About talent so enormous, it survived scandal, addiction, and tabloid cruelty. He wrote Careless Whisper at 17 and created a standard that will outlive us all. He gave us faith and proved pop could be artistically credible. He gave us Freedom, 90, and showed us that destroying your image could be the most authentic thing you do. And he gave us Last Christmas, a song that brings joy to millions every single year, a gift that keeps giving, even after he's gone. George Michael was a genius trapped in the machinery of fame. He was a closeted man in an industry that demanded heterosexuality. He was an addict numbing pain the world never saw. But most of all, he was an artist, one of the very best. And now, finally, the world sees him clearly. If this deep dive into George Michael's journey moved you, subscribe to Version Vault and turn on notifications. We're telling the complete stories behind music's greatest artists. The triumphs, the struggles, and everything in between. What's your favorite George Michael song? Drop it in the comments. Let's celebrate the voice that gave us so much. Rest in peace, George. Your music is eternal, and you're finally, truly free.